The rebar incident. On a construction site in the Philippines during the 1990s, a worker was moving across the upper levels of an unfinished building. Below him, dozens of rebar rods stood vertically from the concrete foundation, waiting to be set into the next layer of the structure. It was a sight anyone in construction is used to: steel bars sticking up into the air. One misstep was all it took. He lost his balance, tumbled off the edge, and landed straight onto the cluster of rebar below. Multiple rods pierced his body in an instant, one driving through his torso, another bursting through his thigh, and at least one more exiting clean through his shoulder. The sheer force pinned him upright, skewered like meat on a spit. He was conscious when rescuers reached him, writhing in agony, blood spilling down the rods beneath him. But cutting him free wasn't simple. Each rebar had to be sawed off individually while he was still hanging there, screaming with every vibration of the metal. For hours, he remained alive, skewered through multiple organs, while workers and paramedics tried desperately to free him without killing him outright. But the damage was too severe. Internal bleeding and shock overcame him before he ever reached the hospital. The cement mixer incident. This next situation takes place in India, on a large-scale building site buzzing with machinery and workers rushing to meet deadlines. Among the loud roars of engines and the constant clatter of steel, a piece of equipment dominated the scene: the cement mixer, which is a massive rotating drum designed to churn concrete non-stop. A worker, tasked with checking the machinery, climbed too close to the mouth of the drum, and with the chaos of the site, with noise and dust clouding his senses, one slip was all it took. He toppled forward and was sucked inside the rotating mixer. Inside the drum, thick, wet concrete spun like quicksand mixed with stone. The worker was thrashed violently against the drum's interior as the heavy blades turned. Colleagues scrambled to shut it down, but by the time the machine ground to a halt, the man had already been pulverized beyond recognition. When the crew finally opened the drum, what they pulled out was no longer a man, but a broken body coated in gray cement, bones shattered, skin torn, and organs ruptured from the relentless pounding. Some parts had even fused with the half-mixed concrete, as though the machine had tried to incorporate him into the building itself. The molten steel incident. In 2014, inside a steel plant in China, the air shimmered with heat, furnaces blazed at temperatures hotter than volcanic lava, and molten steel poured like glowing rivers of liquid fire. Workers moved between cranes, ladles, and massive vats of metal, surrounded by sparks and the constant roar of industry. It looked like just another punishing shift in the steel business, basically like playing tag with lava for minimum wage, until one worker stepped too close to the edge. In a fraction of a second, his footing gave way. The fall wasn't long, but where he landed was unforgiving. He plunged straight into a vat of molten steel, superheated to over 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, there's no second chance, no time to scream, and no possibility of survival. His body was gone the moment it hit. The steel incinerated flesh and bone instantly, reducing a living man into nothing more than vapor and ash. Unlike accidents where a body can at least be recovered, there was nothing left to pull from the vat. Only a faint hiss as the liquid metal consumed him completely. Coworkers stood frozen, horrified at what they'd just seen. Rescue wasn't an option, not when the environment itself was lethal to approach. Even with protective gear, no one could survive near a furnace that hot, let alone inside it. By the time the vat was poured out and cooled, any trace of the worker had been erased, fused into the steel itself. The scaffold incident. In 2019, at a busy construction site in India, workers scrambled across scaffolding that climbed several stories into the air. The structure rattled under their weight, wooden planks creaking, metal poles swaying as hammers and drills echoed around the site. To the men working up there, this was just another day of building in the brutal heat. But scaffolds are only as strong as the bolts holding them. And that day, something gave way. In a sudden lurch, the entire structure shifted. Boards snapped, jolts bent, and the whole platform came down in a crashing cascade of steel and wood. Most of the crew scrambled out of the way or clung to the wreckage as it fell, but one man wasn't so lucky. He plummeted headfirst into the debris, landing directly onto a cluster of protruding steel rods jutting upward from the wreck. The bars punched into his face and skull with sickening precision, impaling him where he landed. Co-workers rushed to him immediately, the chaos of the collapse replaced with horrified urgency. He was still alive, breathing shallowly, blood pooling fast as he gasped for air through the twisted wreckage. Workers grabbed cutting tools, hacksaws, anything they could use to free him from the rods that had trapped him like an animal in a steel trap. The rescue effort was frantic, but hopeless. Every movement sent fresh blood streaming, and every attempt to cut the rods seemed too slow, too clumsy, against the clock that was ticking away inside his body. His strength gave out before the steel did. The elevator shaft incident. Unlike the morning rush when elevators are packed with commuters, this was an empty building, quiet except for the hum of machinery. A maintenance worker stepped into the shaft to handle another routine check. Just him, his tools, and the silence of a steel box waiting to be fixed. As he worked, the lift above suddenly jolted to life. The car began moving downward, slow but unstoppable. At first, it didn't look like a threat. After all, elevators creep along at a pace that feels almost lazy. But in a tight shaft with no escape, that steady descent turned into a nightmare. The worker was pinned against the wall as the massive weight pressed closer, inch by inch. Unlike the dramatic free falls you see in movies, this was worse. Crushing, suffocating, and drawn out. Bones snapped slowly under the relentless pressure, each one cracking like twigs in the dark. Coworkers scrambled to hit controls to stop the system mid-descent, but the machinery wasn't interested in human panic. The car kept grinding lower, sealing his fate with mechanical indifference. And honestly, being caught between floors usually means a late meeting. This time, it meant that the elevator was the meeting, and he wasn't leaving it alive. By the time it finally came to a halt, there was nothing left to save. His body had been mangled beyond recognition, wedged in place like part of the very machine he had been sent to fix. The road roller incident. In the 2010s, on a roadwork site in Vietnam, heavy machinery dominated the scene. The loud grind of engines and the rhythmic pounding of equipment drowned out nearly every other sound. Workers moved between the dust and diesel fumes, focused on finishing the endless stretch of asphalt. Among the hulking machines was the road roller, slow, steady, and deceptively harmless looking, like a giant metal steamroller from a Looney Tunes episode. Except here, there was no second takes and no laugh track. One worker lost his footing near the moving machine. In a single misstep, he fumbled forward and slipped beneath the roller's front drum. The weight of the steel cylinder pressed down instantly, pinning him to the ground. Unlike fast accidents where death comes in a flash, this was drawn out. The machine crept forward at a pace that was agonizingly slow, flattening him inch by inch while he was still alive. Witnesses heard him screaming, a desperate wail that cut through the roar of engines as the roller advanced. Bones cracked under the weight, ribs collapsing, his chest flattening as his insides burst and spread beneath the crushing drum. Skin split open, blood sprayed across the freshly laid asphalt, and the machine painted the road with him as it moved. Coworkers tried frantically to stop the vehicle, but momentum and mass weren't on their side. By the time the machine finally halted, there was nothing recognizable left. If you've made it this far, you've just sat through some of the most brutal and downright agonizing ways construction workers have met their end. Why would you do this to yourself? I have no idea, but congrats. That's all I've got for now. So maybe stay out of the elevator shafts, keep your distance from scaffolds, and for the love of everything, don't test your luck with a road roller. Stay safe out there, and try to enjoy the rest of your day.